She appeared through the Wyoming mist like a ghost, a phantom cutting through the gray dawn, and I should have turned her away. I should have pointed back down the dirt path she'd walked and told her to keep going, because I knew trouble when I saw it. 20 years alone on this ranch, 20 years since I'd let a woman get close enough to speak to me, had taught me one thing. Trouble doesn't knock. It just shows up at your gate, looking like an angel that's been dragged through hell. Her name was Clara Wade. She said it like a prayer, her voice low and rough, like whiskey poured over stones. Her dress, a simple faded cotton thing, was soaked from the morning dew, clinging to her body in a way that left nothing to the imagination. Sweat glistened on her skin, even in the morning chill, and I knew right then she hadn't been walking. She'd been running. I was by the woodpile, axe in hand. My world was simple. Cattle, barbed wire, and the kind of silence that screams. I'd built my life on it, carved a fortress out of solitude because the last time I'd let someone in, they'd burn my world down to the studs. I wasn't about to make that mistake again. "Morning, Mr. Boone," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. They weren't soft. They were desperate, but with a fire behind them, a fire that could either warm a man or burn him alive. "I've come to learn how to milk a cow." The request was so simple, so absurd it was almost laughable. A woman walks 15 miles at dawn, looking like she's outrun a pack of wolves, just to learn about dairy? No, not a chance. My fingers tightened on the axe handle. Every instinct, honed by 2 decades of isolation, told me to send her packing. But then I smelled it. Underneath the scent of wildflowers and morning damp, there was something else. Fear. Pure, uncut fear. She wasn't just here for lessons. She was here for sanctuary. Her stare wasn't just a request. It was a plea. A dare. And I knew, deep in my gut, that whatever she was running from was still out there, sniffing the air, hunting for her. Saying yes to her was like inviting the storm inside. But saying no felt like leaving a lamb for the slaughter. And that's when I made the mistake. The one that would change everything. The one that would drag my past out of its shallow grave and set my future on fire. I said, 2 weeks, sunrise lessons. You do what I say, when I say it. No questions. No talk about where you came from. She nodded, a wave of relief washing over her face so powerful it was like watching a drowning woman find air. But behind the relief was a shadow, a secret she was holding so tight it was a wonder it didn't crack her ribs. And as she stepped through my gate, I felt the lock on my quiet life click open. I had just invited the trouble in, and I had a sinking feeling it wasn't just her trouble anymore. It was mine too. What was I thinking? Let me know in the comments if you would have turned her away. And if you're enjoying this story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because things are about to get a whole lot more complicated. The first morning she arrived before the sun, a ghost in the gray light. She wore a patched but clean work dress, her hands clutching a pair of worn gloves. I led her to the barn, the heavy door groaning open like a tomb. The air inside was thick with the warm, earthy smell of hay and livestock, a smell that had been my only comfort for 20 years. But her presence changed it. Suddenly the air was charged electric. It was the scent of life, of another person breathing my air, and it set my teeth on edge. I started with Bessie, my gentlest Holstein. "Slow steps," I grunted, my voice rusty from disuse. "Cows can smell your fear. They feel it." Clara watched me, her head tilted, absorbing every word. She mimicked my movements, cautious but not clumsy. There was a natural grace to her, a fluidity that didn't fit the story of a city woman wanting to learn ranching. When she crouched beside Bessie, the worn fabric of her dress pulled tight across her shoulders, and I saw the faint outline of old bruises, faded in yellow, just above her collarbone. I turned away, my throat suddenly dry. These weren't the marks of an accident. They were the marks of a man's hands. And just like that, the trouble I'd let in had a name, and a face, and fists. By the third day, she was moving with a confidence that was deeply unsettling. She could calm the most stubborn cow with a low murmur, her hands finding a rhythm that should have taken months to learn. It was like her body remembered a life her words wouldn't speak of. She wasn't learning. She was relearning. The lie burned between us, unspoken. That afternoon, while mucking out a stall, she stumbled, a small cry escaping her lips. I reached out, grabbing her arm to steady her without thinking. Her skin was warm, and for a second, my fingers brushed against a small, hard object tucked into her sleeve. It felt like a piece of wood, intricately carved. She pulled her arm away fast, her eyes wide with panic before she masked it with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Boone," she said, her voice a little too bright. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her sleeve, the image of those bruises flashing in my mind. A woman with secrets, a woman with scars, a woman carrying a hidden totem in her sleeve. This was getting deeper and darker by the minute. That night sleep wouldn't come. The silence of my cabin, once a comfort, now felt empty. I kept thinking about the feel of that carved object. What was she hiding? Who was she hiding from? My past screamed at me to kick her out, to bolt the gate and reclaim my solitude. 20 years ago, a woman's lies had cost me everything. My family, my home, my name. I had vowed never again. Yet here I was. On the fifth day, the storm inside me finally broke. She was humming a soft tune while she worked, a sad old melody that tugged at a memory I'd buried deep. It was a tune my mother used to sing. "Where did you learn that song?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. She froze, her hands stilling on the milking pail. She looked trapped. My, my mother used to sing it," she stammered. "What was her name?" I pressed, stepping closer. "Why does that matter?" While she shot back, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "What was her name, Clara?" She stared at me, her chest rising and falling, a cornered animal deciding whether to fight or flee. The air in the barn crackled. The cows grew restless, sensing the shift. This was it. The moment the lies would either unravel or tighten like a noose. "Lillian," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Her name was Lillian Wade." My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. It was a common name. A coincidence. But the song, the way she moved, the haunted look in her eyes that was so painfully familiar. "Lillian Wade from Johnson County?" I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. Her eyes widened in shock. How did you know that?" And that's when the floor fell out from under my world, because I didn't just know the name. Lillian Wade wasn't just some woman from Johnson County. She was the woman I was supposed to marry. The woman who stood by and watched as my own brother took everything from me. And this woman, Clara, this mysterious, bruised woman at my gate, she wasn't just any stranger. She was Lillian's younger sister, the daughter of the family that had ruined my life. She wasn't running from a stranger. She was running from a history that I was at the very center of, and she had brought it right back to my doorstep. The barn suddenly felt like a cage. The air, thick with the scent of hay and betrayal, was suffocating. Lillian Wade's little sister, standing right here, in my barn, looking at me with those same damn eyes, full of secrets and sorrow. My past wasn't just knocking on the door. It had kicked the damn thing down. For 20 years I had buried that life. I had burned the letters, forgotten the faces, and salted the earth of my own memories. Elias Boone, the man I used to be, died on a cold night in Johnson County, betrayed by the two people he trusted most, his brother Jacob and his fiancée Lillian. And now her sister was here, seeking refuge with the very man her family had destroyed. "You knew," I said, my voice a low growl. "You knew who I was when you came here." Clara flinched, taking a step back. I heard stories. A man living alone up in the mountains. A man who'd lost everything. I didn't know for sure it was you until I saw the brand on the cattle. The old Boone brand. Of course, the brand. The last piece of my heritage Jacob hadn't managed to steal. "So this was all a lie?" I spat, gesturing around the barn. "The milking lessons? You were just using me? Hiding from whatever trouble your family is in now?" "No," she insisted, her voice cracking. "It's not like that. I am in trouble. Deep trouble. I didn't know where else to go. I thought. I hoped you, of all people, might understand." "Understand what?" I roared, the sound echoing off the rafters. The cows panicked, their bellows filling the sudden, tense silence. Understand betrayal? Oh, I understand it perfectly. Your sister was a masterclass. Pain flashed across her face, raw and genuine. She was, Clara whispered. She was, and she paid for it. We all did. Before I could demand what she meant, a sound cut through the chaos. A sharp, distinct snap of a twig from the woods just beyond the corral. It wasn't an animal. It was deliberate, human. We both froze, our personal war forgotten. I grabbed the rifle I always kept propped against the wall. Clara's eyes darted to the barn door, her face pale with a terror that had nothing to do with me. The trouble she was running from wasn't a memory. It was here. Get down, I hissed, shoving her behind a stack of hay bales. I crept to a crack in the barn wall, peering out into the morning light. The corral was empty. The fields beyond were still. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. A cold dread snaked its way up my spine. Whoever was out there, they were professionals. They knew how to move without being seen. Then I saw it, a glint of sunlight reflecting off metal, high up in the ridgeline overlooking the ranch. A spyglass, or a rifle scope. They weren't just watching, they were waiting, sizing us up. Who are they, Clara? I demanded, my voice low and urgent. Who is hunting you? She was trembling, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. They work for a man named Silas Kane, she breathed. He took over everything after my father died. All the ranches in the valley. He controls everything. Silas Kane. The name was a phantom, a whisper of a ruthless land baron who had swept through the territory years ago, buying up or burning out anyone who stood in his way. I had heard he was Jacob's business partner, the man who had financed my brother's betrayal. It was all connected. A web of greed and deceit spun 2 decades ago, and Clara and I were both caught in it. What does he want with you? I pressed. She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the sleeve where she kept her secret totem. My husband, she began, then stopped, swallowing hard. My husband, Thomas, he worked for Kane. He saw things, knew things. He took something before he left. Something Kane wants back, desperately. And where is your husband now? Her eyes met mine, and the look in them chilled me to the bone. He's dead, she said. Kane had him killed. I've been running ever since. The glint from the ridgeline disappeared. The woods fell silent, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a predator that has found the scent. They knew she was here. They knew she was with me. My ranch, my fortress of solitude, was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was a loaded silence, thick with the promise of violence. We stayed hidden in the barn for what felt like an eternity, the minutes stretching into hours. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle of the wind, sounded like an approaching footstep. The sun climbed higher, baking the land, but a cold sweat clung to my skin. Clara was a statue, her fear a palpable thing in the air beside me. She finally reached into her sleeve and pulled out the small carved object. It was a bird, a hawk, carved from a dark, rich wood with incredible detail. It was old, worn smooth from years of being held. This was my mother's, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She gave it to me right before she died. She told me it would keep me safe. A mother's good luck charm. It seemed a pitiful defense against a man like Silas Kane. What did your husband take? I asked again, my voice low. The truth, Clara. No more lies. What is Kane willing to kill for? She clutched the wooden hawk, her knuckles white. It wasn't a ledger. That was a lie. I'm sorry, I was scared. Thomas, he found something. A map. An old Spanish map that supposedly leads to a silver mine, hidden somewhere in these mountains. A silver mine. The oldest and most dangerous story in the West. A tale that had gotten more men killed than bullets and whiskey combined. He hid the map, she continued, her voice trembling. He split it into 3 pieces. He told me he sold one piece, put one in a safe box in Cheyenne, and the last piece, he hid it somewhere only I would know. And where is that? She didn't answer. She just stared at the wooden hawk in her hand. My eyes widened. It wasn't a totem. It was a puzzle box. The map was inside the carving. It had been with her this whole time. Silas Kane only knows that I have a piece of it, she said. He doesn't know which one. He's been tearing the county apart looking for me, looking for the location of that safe box. Suddenly, a horse whinnied from the direction of the main gate. It was too close. They're not waiting anymore, I said, my grip tightening on the rifle. They're coming. We scrambled from the barn, running low toward the cabin. The main house offered better cover, thicker walls. As we reached the porch, 3 riders crested the hill, moving not with speed but with a slow, deliberate arrogance. They weren't here to negotiate. The lead rider was a mountain of a man, with a scarred face and cold, dead eyes. He stopped his horse 100 yards out, his 2 men fanning out on either side. "Boone!" His voice boomed across the ranch, a gravelly sound that scraped at the nerves. "I know you're in there, and I know you've got the girl. Send her out, and Silas Kane might let you live." I pushed Clara inside the cabin. "Stay down and stay away from the windows." I crouched behind the thick oak door, peering through a crack. "You're on my land," I shouted back. "Turn around and ride out." The leader laughed, a humorless, ugly sound. "This land?" he sneered. "This land belongs to Mr. Kane now. He just ain't filed the paperwork yet. Last chance, old man. Give us the girl." "Go to hell," I growled. The scar-faced man just smiled. Then he raised his hand and dropped it. All at once, the world exploded. Gunfire erupted from 3 different directions, ripping into the wood of my cabin. Splinters flew past my head. A bullet shattered the window above the sink, showering the floor with glass. They weren't just 3 riders. They had men hidden in the trees, a coordinated attack. I returned fire, aiming for the lead rider, but he was too far, his men providing covering fire. I was pinned down, outnumbered. "Clara!" I yelled. "The cellar!" She was already moving, pulling up the thick wooden door set in the floorboards. "Come on," she urged. Another volley of shots tore through the wall, one of them catching me in the arm. It felt like a hot poker, searing through muscle and bone. I grunted in pain, stumbling back. Blood soaked my sleeve, hot and slick. "Elias!" Clara screamed. I gritted my teeth, firing 2 more shots out the window to keep their heads down. "Go! Get in the cellar! Bar the door!" "I'm not leaving you!" she cried, her face a mask of terror and defiance. She grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the stove, her only weapon. The firing stopped. A sudden, eerie silence fell. "You're making this hard, Boone," the leader yelled. "We've got all day. We'll just burn you out." I could smell it then. Smoke. They weren't bluffing. I looked out the back window and saw it. Flames were licking up the side of the barn. My barn. My home for 20 years. They were burning it all down. Rage, cold and pure, washed over the pain in my arm. They weren't just taking the girl. They were taking my life, what was left of it. "There's a tunnel," I said through gritted teeth, pressing a hand to my bleeding arm. "In the back of the cellar. My grandfather dug it during the Indian Wars. It comes out in the rocks behind the creek. You take it, you run, and don't look back." "What about you?" she asked, her eyes welling with tears. "I'm going to give them the fight they came for," I said, reloading the rifle. "Now go." She hesitated for a heart-stopping second, then nodded, her face hardening. She scrambled down into the cellar, the wooden hawk clutched in her hand. I heard the heavy bolt slide into place. I was alone, wounded, trapped. The smoke was getting thicker, seeping through the floorboards. The heat was becoming unbearable. I knew I had seconds before the whole cabin went up in flames. I took a deep breath, the smoke searing my lungs. I kicked open the front door and charged out, rifle blazing. I was met with a hail of bullets. I dove behind the water trough, the wood splintering around me. I managed to get one of them, a clean shot that sent him tumbling from his horse. 1 down, 4 or 5 to go. The leader was charging now, his revolver bucking in his hand. I aimed, squeezed the trigger. Click. Empty. His cruel smile was the last thing I saw as he bore down on me. I braced for the impact, for the bullet that would end it all. This was it. This was the end of the line for Elias Boone, but the shot never came. Instead, I heard a roar, not from a man, but from something bigger, something wilder. One of the rider's horses screamed, rearing up as a massive, dark shape launched itself from the roof of the burning barn. It was a cougar, the big male I'd seen hunting in the high ridges, driven mad by the fire and the noise. It landed squarely on the back of one of the gunmen, claws and teeth tearing through flesh. The chaos was absolute. Horses screamed and bolted. Men shouted in panic and pain. The scarred leader pulled his horse up, his eyes wide with disbelief as the mountain lion ripped his man to shreds. It was the distraction I needed. I scrambled for the dead man's pistol, my wounded arm screaming in protest. I came up firing. I shot the leader's horse out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. Another shot took a second rider in the leg. They were broken. The remaining men, seeing their leader down and a wild animal on a rampage, turned and fled, galloping away into the plains. The cougar, its fury spent, dragged its prize into the shadows of the rocks and disappeared. Silence descended once more, broken only by the crackle of the burning barn and the groans of the wounded men. I stood there panting, blood dripping from my arm, my cabin in ruins. I was alive, but I was far from safe. The leader, Scarface, was stirring, pushing himself up from the dirt, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new kind of hatred. "This isn't over, Boone," he spat, blood trickling from his mouth. "Silas Kane will have that map, and he'll have the girl. And now he'll have your head too." He tried to raise his pistol, but I was faster. I kicked it from his hand. From the smoking ruins of the cellar entrance, Clara emerged covered in soot. The iron skillet still clutched in her hand. She stared at the carnage, at me, at the wounded man on the ground. We had won the battle, but Scarface was right. The war was just beginning. And now Silas Kane wasn't just hunting Clara, he was hunting me too. And he knew my name. The sun beat down on the wreckage of my life. The barn was a smoldering skeleton, black smoke curling into the endless blue sky. My cabin, though still standing, was riddled with bullet holes, a testament to the battle we just survived. Two of Kane's men lay dead. A third, the one with the broken leg, was tied up and groaning by the water trough. Clara moved like a woman in a dream, her face smudged with soot, her eyes wide with shock. She tore a strip of cloth from her dress and, without a word, began to clean and bind my wounded arm. Her touch was gentle, practiced. It was the closest I'd let anyone get to me in 20 years. And the feeling was so foreign, so deeply unnerving, I almost pulled away. But the pain, and something else I couldn't name, kept me still. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice hollow. "They'll come back. They'll bring more men." "I'm not running," I said, my jaw tight. This was my land, the only thing I had left. This ends here, one way or another. I limped over to the man we'd captured. His name was Decker, and his arrogance was gone, replaced by the animal fear of a trapped man. I knelt beside him, my face inches from his. "You're going to tell me everything," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "How many men does Kane have? Where is he holed up? What's his plan?" Decker just spat at my boots. "Go to hell, old man. Kane will pay you back for this. For all of it." I glanced at Clara. Her face had gone hard, the soft fear replaced by a cold fury. She picked up a bucket of water from the trough and calmly poured it over the man's broken leg. He screamed, a high, piercing sound that echoed across the ruined yard. "My sister used to say you catch more flies with honey," Clara said, her voice flat and cold. "But my father always said that fear is a much better tool. You're going to talk, or I'm going to start breaking things that aren't already broken." I'd never seen this side of her. This wasn't the frightened victim who'd shown up at my gate. This was a woman forged in hardship, a woman who had learned to be as cruel as the men who hunted her. And in that moment, I knew her story about a silver mine was just that, a story. The truth was something far more valuable and far more dangerous. It took another hour, but Decker eventually broke. He told us everything. Silas Kane wasn't just a land baron. He was building an empire, a private army. He operated out of a fortified ranch down in the Southern Valley, a place called Serpent's Jaw. And they weren't coming back with a few men. They were coming back with everything they had. But it was the last thing he told us. A piece of information he gave up in a final, desperate plea that changed the game completely. "It ain't just the map," he gasped, his face pale with pain. "Kane don't care about the silver. It's the name. The name on the deed." I looked at Clara, confused. "What deed?" Decker looked from me to her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. You don't know? She didn't tell you?" Clara's face was a mask. She wouldn't look at me. "Tell me what?" I demanded. "The deed to this land," Decker whispered, his voice full of disbelief. "This ranch. It ain't in your name, Boone. It hasn't been for 20 years. The map your brother made, it ain't a map to a silver mine. It's a treasure map to the original, signed deed. The one that proves ownership of this entire valley. And it's registered in her name, Clara Wade." The world stopped spinning. The crackle of the dying fire, the buzz of the flies, the pounding in my head, it all went silent. I stared at Clara, the woman I had sheltered, the woman I had fought for, the woman who had been lying to me since the moment she set foot on no, not my land, her land. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice a hollow whisper. She finally met my eyes, and I saw the truth there, along with shame and a deep, bottomless fear. She nodded, a single, jerky motion. "My father," she began, her voice trembling, "before he lost everything to Kane and your brother, he knew they were coming for him. He was a lawyer. He found a loophole, an old land grant. He used what little money he had left, and he bought this mountain, this whole valley, and put it in my name as a trust. It was my dowry, my inheritance. He hid the deed, creating the legend of a silver mine to throw people off the scent. He knew the land itself, with its water rights, was worth more than any mine. Thomas, my husband. He was my father's clerk. He was the only other person who knew. When my father died, Thomas betrayed me. He tried to sell the secret to your brother and Silas Kane." The pieces clicked into place. The lies, her strange familiarity with ranch work, her desperation. She hadn't come here just for sanctuary. She had come home. 20 years. For 20 years I had lived here, worked this land, bled into the soil, believing it was my last refuge. But I was just a squatter, a ghost haunting someone else's property. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. It was worse than what Lillian and Jacob had done. This felt intimate. She had watched me day after day, letting me believe the lie, using my solitude as her shield. "You let me fight for you," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You let me bleed for what I thought was mine." "I was going to tell you," she cried, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. I swear I was. I was so scared. I didn't know who to trust. And then I saw how you loved this place, how you cared for it. I knew you were the only one who could protect it, protect me. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to rage. I wanted to turn my back on her and let Silas Kane have her, have the land, have it all. But I couldn't, because beneath the anger and the betrayal, a deeper, more terrible truth remained. She was right. I did love this place, and looking at her, this broken, fierce, lying woman, I realized with a sickening certainty that I wasn't just fighting for the land anymore. "So this is it," I said, looking toward the south, toward Serpent's Jaw. "This is the last stand." "What are we going to do?" she whispered. I looked at the smoking ruins of my home, at the bodies of the men I'd killed, at the woman who owned my entire world. For 20 years I had been running from my past, hiding from my brother's betrayal, but the past had found me. There was no more running. "We're not going to wait for them to come back," I said, my voice hard as iron. "We're going to take the fight to them. We're going to Serpent's Jaw. We're going to get your deed, and I'm going to get my brother." This wasn't about land anymore, or silver, or lies. This was about blood. We left Decker tied up in the root cellar with enough food and water for a few days. A small mercy, but more than he deserved. If we didn't come back, someone would eventually find him. If we did, well, he'd have to answer to Clara. The journey south was a grim, silent affair. We took the two best horses, salvaged what little food and ammunition was left, and rode under the cover of darkness. The fire from my burning barn was a funeral pyre on the horizon behind us, a constant reminder of what we had lost and what we stood to lose. Clara rode beside me, her face set in a mask of grim determination. The lies were gone, stripped away by fire and blood, and all that was left was the raw, ugly truth. She was the rightful owner of the land I called home, and I was the ghost who haunted it. We were two broken people, bound together by the sins of our families. As we rode, she told me the rest of the story, about how my brother, Jacob, had partnered with Silas Kane, using Kane's muscle and money to systematically crush all the smaller ranchers, including her father. Jacob was the strategist, Kane the brute. Together they were a plague on the territory. Her husband Thomas hadn't just tried to sell the secret of the deed. He'd been murdered by Jacob himself when the deal went sour. She had witnessed it, and that's why they weren't just hunting her for the map. They were hunting her to silence the last witness to their crimes. The wooden hawk, the puzzle box containing the final piece of the map, was now in my pocket. It felt heavier than lead. It was the key to everything. Clara had the second piece, memorized from the document in the Cheyenne safe box. The first piece, sold by her treacherous husband, was the one Jacob and Kane possessed. They have the starting point, she explained, her voice low in the darkness. I have the landmarks. And the hawk. The hawk has the final location of the hidden deed. We were riding into the Serpent's Mouth armed with 2/3 of a map and a desperate suicidal plan. Serpent's Jaw was less a ranch and more a fortress. It was nestled in a narrow rocky canyon with armed guards on the ridges and a single, heavily fortified gate. A frontal assault was impossible. We'd be cut down before we got within 100 yards. There's another way, I said, studying the canyon walls as we lay hidden in the rocks above. An old mining tunnel. It runs right under the canyon. My father showed it to me when I was a boy. If it hasn't collapsed, it should bring us out right in the middle of their compound. It was a long shot, a gamble based on a 20-year-old memory. But it was the only shot we had. We found the entrance hidden behind a waterfall, just as I remembered. The air inside was cold and stale. The darkness, absolute. We lit a single lantern, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the damp rock walls. For hours we navigated the claustrophobic tunnels, my father's old lessons guiding us through the labyrinth. Finally we saw it, a faint sliver of light ahead. The tunnel ended in a grated opening, covered by overgrown bushes. We were looking out into the heart of Serpent's Jaw. It was a hornet's nest, crawling with at least 30 of Kane's men. In the center of the compound stood a large, defensible ranch house, and standing on the porch giving orders was a man I hadn't seen in 2 decades. He was older, his face harder, but it was him, my brother, Jacob Boone. Seeing him again, after all this time, didn't ignite the rage I expected. It was something colder, heavier. It was the weight of a life stolen. Beside him stood Silas Kane, a bear of a man with a cruel, calculating face. They were arguing, their voices carrying on the still night air. "Find her, Jacob. She's the only loose end," Kane was saying. "She's either dead or halfway to California by now," Jacob retorted. "My brother is the real problem. He's tough, but he's a hermit. He's not a threat to us." A cold smile touched my lips. He was about to find out how wrong he was. Our plan was simple. Create a diversion, get to the main house where the safe and the first piece of the map would be, and get out. I would handle the diversion. Clara, who knew the layout from Decker's description, would get the map. "The main fuse box for the compound is in the stables," I whispered, pointing. "I take that out, the lights go, and you have 60 seconds of darkness to get to that house. Go straight for Jacob's office. Decker said he keeps everything in a floor safe behind his desk." She nodded, her eyes wide but steady. "What's the diversion?" "They burned my home," I said, my voice a low growl. "I'm just returning the favor." I slipped out of the tunnel and crept toward the stables, a bundle of oil-soaked rags in my hand. The night was my ally. The guards were lazy, confident in their fortress. I reached the stables undetected, planted my fire starter, and made my way to the fuse box on the exterior wall. I took a deep breath. I pulled the main lever. The world plunged into absolute darkness and chaos. Shouts of confusion and alarm filled the night. A few seconds later, a bright orange glow began to bloom from the stables. "Go!" I mouthed to Clara, who was already sprinting from the tunnel exit toward the dark silhouette of the ranch house. Now it was my turn. I didn't hide. I walked out into the open, my rifle in my hand. As men ran toward the burning stables, I began to pick them off, one by one, using the flickering firelight as my guide. I was a ghost, a phantom of vengeance they had foolishly dismissed. Panic erupted. They were caught between a fire in front of them and a sniper behind them. Jacob's voice rose above the din, trying to restore order, but it was too late. I had sown chaos and I was reaping a bloody harvest. I saw a light flicker in the upstairs window of the main house. Clara, she was in. But then a hulking figure emerged from the porch, firing blindly into the darkness. Silas Kane. He wasn't panicking, he was hunting, and he was moving in my direction. I dropped my last man near the stables and turned my attention to the house. It was time to get Clara and go. I moved through the shadows, a ghost in the chaos I'd created. I slipped in through the back door of the ranch house, the sounds of shouting and gunfire outside providing perfect cover. I found the office, the door slightly ajar. The heavy floor safe was open, its contents scattered. Clara was there, frantically stuffing papers into a satchel. She had the first piece of the map. She had found it. "We have to go," I hissed. But as we turned to leave, the doorway was filled by the massive silhouette of Silas Kane. He held a lantern in one hand and a shotgun in the other. A cruel smile spread across his face. "Well, well," he boomed. "The little mouse and her pet ghost. Did you really think it would be this easy?" He took a step into the room, the shotgun aimed squarely at my chest. We were trapped. "It's over, Boone," he said. "Give me the map pieces, and I'll kill you quickly." But before I could answer, another figure appeared behind Kane. My brother, Jacob. He held a revolver in his hand, but it wasn't pointed at us. It was pointed at the back of Silas Kane's head. "It's over for you, Silas," Jacob said, his voice cold and steady. "You've outlived your usefulness." Kane froze, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. "Jacob? What is this?" "This was never your land," Jacob said. "It was always Boone land. My land. I just needed your money and your men to help me secure it. Now that my brother has so kindly cleared out the trash for me, I no longer require a partner." The gunshot was deafening in the small room. Silas Kane crumpled to the floor, his lantern shattering, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the distant flickering light of the burning stables. Jacob stepped over the body, his revolver now aimed at me. "Hello, brother," he said, his voice dripping with 2 decades of venom. "It's been a long time. I see you've brought me the final piece of my puzzle." He gestured with the gun towards Clara. "Give me the hawk and the other map piece. Now." This was it, the final betrayal, the source of all my pain, standing right in front of me. "You threw it all away, Jacob," I said, my voice low. "For what? Dirt? For a piece of paper?" "It's not just dirt," he screamed, his composure finally cracking. "It's a legacy, an empire. Our father was too weak to see it. He wanted to share it, to be fair. Fairness is for fools and dead men. I built this. I took what was ours." "What was ours?" I corrected him. "You stole my life, Jacob. You turned Lillian against me." He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Lillian? She never loved you, Elias. She loved what you represented, the favored son. She chose the winner, and that was me." Clara stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You're wrong. She regretted what she did every day of her life. She died of a broken heart, knowing she had helped a monster." "Sentimental fool," Jacob spat. He cocked the hammer of his revolver. "The map, Elias. Or she dies first. Then you." I looked at Clara. I looked at the gun in my brother's hand. For 20 years I had dreamed of this moment, of getting my revenge. But now, seeing the hollow, pathetic man my brother had become, consumed by his own greed, I didn't feel hatred. I just felt pity. I slowly reached into my pocket and took out the wooden hawk. I held it out. This is what you want? This is what you destroyed our family for? He snatched it from my hand, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Finally, it's all mine. He turned his back on us for a fraction of a second, his attention completely focused on the prize in his hand. It was the only opening I needed. I lunged not at him, but at the heavy oak desk beside him. With all my strength, I shoved it, sending it crashing into his legs. He stumbled, his shot going wild, shattering a mirror on the wall. I tackled him, driving him to the floor. The gun flew from his hand, skittering into a dark corner. We were a whirlwind of fists and fury, two brothers locked in a battle 20 years in the making. He was strong, but my life of hard labor had made me stronger. I pinned him, my hands on his throat. It's over, Jacob, I panted. But his eyes weren't looking at me. They were looking past me at the door. I heard a click. I turned my head and saw Thomas, Clara's husband. The man she'd told me was dead. He was thin, pale, and haunted, and he was holding Jacob's revolver, its barrel leveled at my head. Get off him, Thomas whispered, his voice trembling. The final twist of the knife. It was all a lie. All of it. Jacob started to laugh, a gurgling, triumphant sound from beneath me. You see, brother? You will always lose. I always have a backup plan. Clara stared at her husband, her face a canvas of shock and betrayal. Thomas, I thought I saw you. Jacob's men got to me first, he said, his eyes never leaving me. He offered me a deal. Help him get all the map pieces and he'd give me a share. A better share than you ever would have, Clara. My world tilted on its axis. I had been played. From the very beginning. Clara's appearance at my gate, the story, the tears. Was any of it real? Was she in on it too? Now get off of him, Boone, Thomas repeated, his hands shaking. I looked into Clara's eyes, searching for an answer. And what I saw there wasn't deceit. It was a shattering heartbreak. She hadn't known. This was as much a shock to her as it was to me. I slowly got off Jacob, who scrambled to his feet, a triumphant sneer on his face. Excellent work, Thomas, Jacob said, dusting himself off. Now give me the gun, and we can finish this. Thomas hesitated, his eyes flicking from Jacob to his wife. You promised, Jacob. You promised she wouldn't be hurt. Plans change, Jacob said with a shrug, holding out his hand for the gun. And in that moment, I saw the flicker of conflict in Thomas's eyes. He looked at the monster he had allied with, and then at the woman he had betrayed. Whatever shred of a man was left inside him made a final choice. He turned the gun and fired, not at me, not at Clara. He shot Jacob square in the chest. My brother staggered back, a look of utter disbelief on his face. He looked down at the blossoming red stain on his shirt, then back at Thomas. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a wet, gurgling sound came out. He crumpled to the floor, the wooden hawk falling from his lifeless hand. Thomas didn't hesitate. He turned the gun, the barrel now pointed at his own temple. Thomas, no! Clara screamed. I'm sorry, Clara, he whispered, for everything. Before either of us could move, he pulled the trigger. The second gunshot echoed in the sudden, deafening silence. We were left standing in a room with 3 dead men, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and regret. The battle was over. The aftermath was a blur. We gathered the map pieces and the deed from the safe. We walked out of the ranch house, past the bodies and the burning stables, into the gray light of dawn. The few of Cain's men who were left had scattered to the winds. We didn't look back. We rode for 2 days back to the ranch. Our ranch. We buried the deed in a strong box under the hearthstone of the ruined cabin, the place where it truly belonged. The land was finally safe. It was Clara's by law, by birthright. But as we stood there, looking out over the valley, the morning sun healing the scarred landscape, I knew it was more than that. What will you do now? I asked her. She looked at me, her eyes clear for the first time since I'd met her. The fear was gone. The lies were gone. All that was left was a quiet strength. I'm going to rebuild, she said. We're going to rebuild. We. That one word hung in the air, a promise of a future I never thought I'd have. For 20 years I had been a ghost, haunting the ruins of my own life. But Clara Wade, a woman of secrets and lies, had somehow, through all the chaos and bloodshed, given me a reason to live again. My name is Elias Boone, and this is my land. This is my home. And this is the story of how I lost everything and then found it all again in the most unexpected way. It's a story of betrayal and a story of redemption. And it's a story that's far from over. If you enjoyed this story and you want to hear what happens next for me and Clara, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment to let us know where you're listening from, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Because the Wild West is full of stories, and I'm just getting started.